Day one of FNCS semifinals is now over, and we have our first teams qualifying straight through to grand finals with big names like Peterbot, Booga, Aegis. But I also want to talk about teams that haven't quite got there yet, like Clicks and Venom, Mr. Savage, and Mongrel, and what's stopping them from potentially qualifying to grand finals. I also want to talk about the massive new Pirates of the Caribbean update that just got added midway through FNCS and why so many players are upset about it. There's a lot to talk about. Let's jump into it. Let's kick off talking about who qualified through to grand finals and who is still doing really well in FNCS. In case you don't know the format, it's super simple. Day one of FNCS, if you won a game of upper bracket, you went straight through to the grand finals. If you came bottom 25 of upper bracket, you dropped down to lower bracket. And if you came top 30 of lower bracket, you go up to upper bracket. So there was a lot on the line, especially for those players playing the upper bracket, trying to get a win on NA. We had 5 really big teams bring it home. We had Peterbot and Aviv in first overall, winning their 4th game after getting a 2nd, 10th, 2nd, and then finally winning their 4th game. Now, mind you, this is off the back of the Duo Cash Cup finals yesterday, where they won 4 out of 6 games. Peterbot and Poyo are looking as dominant as they were last season. They are absolutely popping off, and they're doing it without the Grimgate coin. Now, I will talk about how the meta kind of played out today in upper bracket with the most recent edition of the Crash Pad Juniors. The end games in Fortnite right now are super exciting. They are full chaos. I don't know how much the players are enjoying it at times, but as far as watching it, it was so much fun to see. We would have 8 to 9 teams play high ground in one game, and then it was just whoever was left standing at the end. On EU, we had 2 of the teams qualifying because they started playing medkits like 30 seconds early. Everyone else basically just griefed each other. They came out and then won the game. So it was a super chaotic meta, which is the reason why Peterbot did have 2 second places. I don't think they were like deliberately trying not to win, so they qualified. It was just really hard to hold high ground in these lobbies. The second team that qualified through was Aviv and Booga. They managed to win game number 5. Again, they played really well throughout the day as well. Aegis and Rise picked up the win in game number 3, also getting a 5th in the first game as well. Aegis and Rise also just got a massive buff with the new update, getting that new pirate ship in the middle of the map. I'll talk about everything that got added with the update in a second because it was crazy. It wasn't just the drop map changes. We also saw an item get added that wasn't meant to be in competitive. Talk about that in a second. We had Bryce and Bolts getting a win in the second game, and then we had Dukes and Sphinx bringing it home with a win in the very first game. So those 5 teams are now automatically straight through to grand finals on NA. Over on EU, meanwhile, we did have some really big teams. I feel like they weren't maybe the biggest teams that a lot of people were expecting. We had Prism and Wox picking up the win in game number 4. Ping and Wox. We had Prism and Casper picking up the win in game number 5. We had Focus and Belusi picking up the win in game number 3. Trulex and Chicho picking up the win in game number 2. And then Kindex and Phantom, the Middle East duo that came over from Middle East to compete on EU, winning game 1. This was extremely hyped, especially for the small regions who often get disrespected by the EU players. Kindex and Phantom have come over to compete on EU without having already qualified for LAN. This isn't like Alex and Worthy where they have nothing to lose. Kindex and Phantom were confident enough to say, hey, we need to make LAN, and we think we have a better chance of doing it on EU than Middle East, and they backed up their confidence with a game 1 win. Even though these other teams I'm about to talk about didn't get a win in upper bracket and they didn't drop down a lower bracket, I do still want to talk about some of the teams that are doing extremely well, because you got to remember, grand finals isn't going to be like this reboot round format where you get a win to go through. The teams that are doing really consistently are still worth focusing on. We had Kanata and Cooper finishing in top place without getting a win, getting a ridiculous 3 Elim 3rd, 6 Elim 2nd, 6 Elim 4th, and then a 0 Elim 13th and a 1 Elim 14th. So really consistent gameplay from Kanata and Cooper, but they didn't bring home the win, so they will still be staying in the semifinals. We had Pink and Mero very similarly having a really good performance. They managed to get a 4th, 3rd, and 8th and still not qualify, but possibly the most unlucky of the teams on NA, we had Clicks and Veno getting a 2nd and a 3rd and an 8th and still not making it out of the semifinals. Now, the start was looking a little bit rough for Clicks and Veno. They didn't really kick off with the crazy performance we were expecting due to their games earlier in the season. A lot of people saying the Crash Pad meta has kind of messed up their playstyle. Clicks and Veno were really good at taking height early in the season. They would condition it, they would spray it out, they would, mirror under height, then they would take it really skillfully. With the Crash Pad meta, it's a little bit about just crash padding it. I don't want to say praying, but it's a lot more chaotic, and Clix and Venno weren't really adapting to that as well. They really struggled yesterday in the Duo Cash Cup finals, which had a lot of people nervous coming into FNCS today. Venno apparently was feeling really unwell for the Duo Cash Cup finals, so I wouldn't hold that too much against them, especially when they came out and performed really, really well in FNCS. So they're still playing semis. They haven't got the win yet, but I do think they have a good chance of pulling it off. Now, another thing I do want to mention that kind of came out of today when it comes to grand finals is the teams that were able to take high ground and make those really aggressive plays were a lot of teams who actually had the weapons to do so. Because this is a very DMR surge base heavy meta where a lot of teams are carrying double DMRs into endgame, you pretty much can't make a crash pad for hype play with 2 DMRs. It just doesn't work. You really need, a Deagle, a burst SMG, maybe the mythic AR like Peterbot has to really have that advantage to be able to fight the team on high ground. This isn't as much of a problem in grand finals because you can still get really good points and really good placement from playing low and mid ground, but when only the win matters, it changes things up a lot. It was really refreshing watching these games not go to heal off every single time, and I hope grand finals it doesn't go to heal off every time, but again, I think that was impacted by the fact that so many teams who were already guaranteed staying in uppers, like they had nothing to lose, they might as well go for the win or nothing, which just means just full sending it on high ground. So I'm excited to see how Clix and Venno adapt to this meta as it evolves, and I think they did really, really well. We also had Barker and Paz, Cam and Minished, Batman Booga and Rapid after being triple contested at Grim Gate. Taste and Yomzo was up there. We had a lot of big names, but unfortunately we do now have some big names dropping down into the lower bracket. Again, anyone who came 26th to 50th is going to drop down to the lower bracket now as well. That includes big teams like Skittles dropping down, Visuals dropping down, Kylie, Bucky, and Okus struggling with only 4 points on the board. So a lot of these teams were trying to switch up their drop spot. Once the team already qualified, they tried to switch it up. Bucky and Okus ended up going redline rig in the final game after Peterbot qualified. Unfortunately, still not being able to do it out of there, so we'll have to see how they go. Now remember, you can still make it to grand finals without winning a game. That's the only way to make it straight through upper brackets, but day 3, we're going to have 6 set lobby games where whoever gets top 25 in the first 3 is going to go through to grands, and whoever gets top 15 in the next 3 also goes through. So you don't have to win a game to make grands, you just have to in the first couple of days. So a lot of these teams that are struggling to get a win will still very easily qualify if they keep playing as consistent. You're probably wondering where all the big names are on EU. Most of them had that very consistent playstyle but just couldn't get a win. We had Vicon, Flixie in 6th, CZB and Nathan in 7th, Chap and Tini in 8th, Seti and Cami in 9th. The big names did well, they just couldn't get their hands on a win. Mustache and Malibuka, Quizzy and Thomas, all these teams again will be staying in the upper bracket to see if they can still qualify with a win tomorrow or off consistency at the very end of it. We didn't really have a lot of the big names on EU super struggling, they just couldn't get their hands on the win. We do still need to talk about lower bracket. Again, the top 30 teams from this lower bracket will be jumping up to uppers to play with a much better chance to qualify, and we had 2 very big names at the top of that leaderboard on NA. Acorn and Cold in first on 654 points. They dropped 107 eliminations in a semifinals. They were running through the lobby. They had qualified in only 2 games, and that might sound crazy until you also notice that Mongrel and Savage in second place on 557 managed to also qualify in only 3 games, winning their first 3 games in a row. They got an 8 elim win, an 8 elim win, and an 11 elim win. They also got a 2nd and 3rd place later in the day. So Mongrel and Savage are looking extremely good coming into FNCS, but the only issue is they are now going to be contested. The drop map hasn't completely been set yet. There is still time for this to move, but Death and Edgy, the other big name team on NA that is now going Mr. Savage and Mongrel's drop, they are already in upper bracket and they weren't able to get a win on day 1, which means going into day 2, they are going to be contesting each other. Again, if you haven't followed it, Mr. Savage and Mongrel are currently dropping on what I'm calling the Slum Split, which is just to the east of Nitro Dome. It's a really, really good drop, and honestly, they are doing extremely well from it when they're uncontested. While being contested by an extremely solid team like Death and Edgy, it could be a different story. Savage and Mongrel managed to come 6th in the Duo Cash Cup finals a few days ago when they had an uncon. So this insane performance we saw today, they are backing it up in set lobbies as well. They're not just open warriors. If anything, I think Savage and Mongrel play better the more stacked the lobby, but when they're contested, it's going to be a different story. So we'll have to see. Hopefully they can at least stay in upper bracket even if they can't win a game tomorrow, so they have that much better chance of qualifying on day 3. The biggest issue though is I really do feel like only one of these teams is going to qualify unless one of them can manage to get a win, which leaves the other team uncontested. But then you still have to verse them in the grand finals, and you're just pushing that problem down the line. So I'm all on board for the Mr. Savage and Mongrel making grands, making land storyline. It would be so incredibly hype, but at this point it looks like Death and Edgy are standing between them and making that point. And before you go and start throwing a bunch of hate on Death and Edgy for, oh, they're contesting them for clout, that's so cringe. Death and Edgy only started going the drop spot because Mongrel and Savage were struggling to make set lobby finals. They've only made 2 set lobby finals this whole season, so Death and Edgy seeing that were like, cool, that's a pretty good drop spot, let's give it a try. They now like the drop spot, and it is what it is. So I really hope we can see both these teams do well, because I actually love both these teams a lot. I'm honestly hoping one of them finds a new drop spot, but I don't think it's gonna be Mongrel and Savage. We did have a few other big teams on NA and EU I want to shout out making it to upper bracket. We had Turtle Tavern and TK, we had Blake and Macwood, the OG GOATs, we had Twenty, Tahi, Al, and we had the OCE boys. Alex and Worthy from Team Power have now qualified to upper bracket, giving them a very, very good chance to make it through to grand finals on NA. Now, over on EU, we also had some big names, Nebs and Kiddo coming in first on 416 points overall. We had Curver's team, Noah Riley and Aqua. Speaking of the OG GOATs doing very, very well. We had Artskill and Shakos, we had Karama, we had Henry 30J, a lot of really big teams on EU now stepping up into that upper bracket. I'm very excited to see especially how Aqua and Noah Riley do here. When you have a super aggressive hype meta with a way to get yourself onto height instead of being a launch pad, in this sense it's now a crash pad, that is when Aqua shines. And Noah Riley and Aqua have been doing really well in the tournaments outside of FNCS this season as well. So I'm super hyped to see how this OG duo does. I know I've been focusing a lot on the crash pads being added, but I do want to talk about the Pirates of the Caribbean update being added midway through FNCS. So if you guys haven't played Fortnite, you haven't seen it, we have a massive Pirates of the Caribbean collaboration going on. There's map changes, a whole bunch of skins, a whole bunch of new items, and most of it wasn't supposed to affect competitive. I made a video a couple days ago talking about how I think the only thing that'll really change is the drop map. The fact that we will have a new POI added to the middle of the map, the new pirate ship, which we did. It added 25 chests to the map. It also added a whole bunch of containers and a reboot van and a bunch of other big stuff, but it also added cannons. Now, cannons, if you remember from chapter 1, you can jump in them, shoot yourself, and use them for rotation. I didn't know whether that was going to make it into competitive or not, but it ended up making it. There was also another pirate ship that got added to the map over near the secret cave on the far east of the map, but one thing that wasn't supposed to get added but kind of did was the treasure map. And before you freak out, the treasure map in competitive would be absurdly broken, getting a full gold loadout, but because it wasn't meant to be added, it's kind of bugged. If you pick it up in competitive and you follow it, all you get from it is 2 big pods. It doesn't drop any weapons like it's meant to. So it's in, but most of the pros are just ignoring it, so I guess it's just kind of clogging the loot pool. Epic obviously made some kind of a mistake here. Again, if you get it in public matches, you can get, you know, flint knock, you get a whole bunch of crazy weapons. Another thing that didn't get added to competitive, thank God, is the new ship in a bottle item. This thing is absurd. It does thousands of structure damage, so you can break through boxes. It does 100 damage to players. You just basically summon a giant pirate ship that you then ride through your enemies. It's one of the craziest items I have ever seen. If you guys want to stay up to date with all of the action and watch what actually happened, make sure you check out my YouTube channel, Extra Antics. We're cooking up all the highlights from EU and NA and all the FNCS matches, just giving you the best bits so you can get a nice condensed version of what's going on. Make sure you subscribe. I'd really appreciate it.